Howdy. This sort of goes for the last two talks. When specifically you, Jakub, or I'm not sure how you pronounce that Polishly, but Jakub, the difference between a Joycean epiphany and a epiphany in Miller. To me, Miller, even some of those ecstatic, vital passages you were talking about, James, could be viewed as an epiphany. Whereas a Joycean epiphany, I think, is much clearer. You have a sort of image, you have a situation, he elucidates on it, and there's some transformation. Could you and maybe both of you go into what the distinction is there? Is a Millerian epiphany actually the prose, not even some external event, or what is going on there?
I'm strongly convinced that it's possible to differ these two types of epiphany, because in case of Joyce, it's important that this epiphany leads to an disillusionment, and it's like the core of that. Miller is different because he's rather trying to see something holy, divine, special, but after that he isn't critical about that. Like it's the process. And I think it's different. Also, in case of Proust, there is something similar to Joyce, because this epiphany with Madeline, which is like very famous, isn't the perfect epiphany for Proust, because in the last volume of his marvelous novel, he noted that epiphany is something different, and showed us that. And so I think we can differ, and it's important to do it, because by that we can show that Miller is an original author of modernism, and yeah, that's my view.
I think that idea of revision comes in here. It's not just one epiphany; it's a series of epiphanies that he's having, depending on the context, depending on which work we're talking about. In a work like Tropic of Capricorn or Sexus, he's writing about a period in his life where he wasn't quite yet an artist, and so there are a lot of these sort of, I call them proxy moments, perhaps, where he's just overwhelmed with feeling. He's overwhelmed with emotion by something that he's listened to, or that he's seen, or that he's heard. Later, after he's become an artist, say in Tropic of Cancer, I think he's just post-epiphany even. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you guys for all speaking today. This is for anyone who wants to kind of take this. I see a lot of threads through all three of your presentations there. You know, Miller, when I think about early Miller and his childhood growing up in a German immigrant family in Brooklyn, it seems he was already predisposed to becoming an academic, a voracious reader, and, you know, like you just mentioned, there was a lot of epiphanies that Miller had throughout his life, you know. And his introduction into the arts also happened at a very early age. And I'm wondering, you know, just off of your research, if you could talk about what you think what propelled him to become someone who took that big risk to become an artist in his, say, 20s?
Yeah, a good point about his early upbringing and particularly his mother. But as far as the reading goes, I believe his grandfather warned his parents about he's reading too much. let's stop this. As far as his pursuit, he talks about telling stories to his little friends, and sort of transporting them off to other areas. But early on, he was more devoted to the piano, really, and thought he might become a professional piano. And so there's music everywhere. It's really not. I mean, if you look at the Rosary Crucifixion, especially sexist, there's all these people saying, why don't you become a writer? Why don't you write like you talk? And there's also these moments where he just sort of loses himself. He doesn't even remember what he said, but he's captivated an audience, whether it's an audience of a group of friends or whatever, or it's a bigger audience. And I think, at that point, this idea that, well, maybe I could, but he's not able to get over the fact, okay, I've got to pay the house, I've got a wife, I've got a kid, right? And then really it's not till June essentially pushes him over the edge, right? He needs that person to pull him to the precipice before he'll take that leap.
Yeah, let me add to that. I think that I'm trying to get at what you're asking. I think that, for Miller, he is forced into it in a way through poverty, through, this madness that he has for June. And, other writers, we might look at someone like, George Orwell or Jack Kerouac, who have middle-class upbringings, and then they're like, listen, I know I got to go out there and go down and out. I have to start hanging out with criminals, or I have to. And I think for Miller, it was much more natural. It just happens to him, and sort of pushes him into that in a way. He didn't need to go out looking for experience. It was there for him a little more. Yeah.
I wanted to address Colossus of Maraci again, sort of, because it seems to me like I have this image of that book in my mind, and maybe other people here do as well, of it being kind of standing alone among Miller's work, that it's this kind of statement that he doesn't really make anywhere else. And so this idea of epiphany in that book, and I'm sort of aiming this question at Jacob, but I'm interested in what the other two of you panelists think about this as well, is does that book really stand alone, or where does that idea of epiphany appear? Does that link it to some of Miller's other work in a way as well? Or is it really just that book that addresses this thing? Does that link it up with other works?
That's a great question. I think this book somehow is different, but there is something like core of this which is important to all Miller's works, I would say. And we also should bear in mind that term epiphany is very broad, and it can be applied to like just poetic of sentence, for example, in which we have, for example, moment of realization, of gaining knowledge, some view about something important. And on the other side, we have these religious epiphanies, or these which are connected to tradition of epiphany in this religious or secularized sense. And I think like epiphany as a poetic device, which is very broad, is typical for Miller, but whether it's religious, I think it should be done by some researcher to search that in another books.
I mean, maybe what we're seeing in Colossus is that his epiphanies he's dead serious in that book, and he's really experiencing something. I mean, think about, he has multiple epiphanies in Tropic of Cancer, right? But like one of them is when he takes Gandhi's disciple to the whorehouse, and it's hilarious. I mean, I think that rather than maybe what you're saying is that rather than just a literary device, there's something within the language itself that means that he's really experiencing something that changes him, which I think it does. I think his writing after that is very different than the Tropics and Black Spring and his earlier work. Something changes in him. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It's maybe a hinge between those stylistic pyrotechnics in those Parisian books and the much more accepting, peaceful later books, right? And I think it's connected to Big Sur too. I think it's a double epiphany, right?
Yeah.
he can't
reinforces.
He can't just do
what he found
one.
there, yeah.
My questions to Professor Decker. You have in your talk you spoke on something which was connected with Miller's response to power vis-a-vis Foucault, and there seems to have been some kind of acute awareness of in Miller on the encroachment of media power, power structures, despite the fact that Miller was working at that point of time when there was no media as such in the way media is today. But we don't know what would he have done had there been media in the way it is now today, encroaching upon all aspects of life. Now, Miller was working at the same time when Marshall McLuhan was also there. Was writing. He famously, declared, "Medium is the message." Was it that Miller was gradually becoming more and more concerned about the aggressive encroachment of media, for which he was trying to be a recluse of sorts?
Well, I know he hated television, but he was a huge film fan, a big film buff. I think more so the particular type of media is who's controlling it and what messages it's sending, right? That a newspaper as an instrument of sort of a psychological leveling, where these are the things you should do, these are the things you should not do. That I think is what he's pushing against, and particularly that self-regulatory element that Foucault is talking about, because I think he saw in himself from a distance, right? That's what he was doing, and so it's not until he can consciously say, no, I'm not going to try to be a good husband. I'm not going to try to be a good employee. Although if we believe Tropic of Capricorn, he wasn't a good employee anyway, right? Which is what that one quotation from Sextus says, that, you know, until I stopped trying to be good, right, I was giving nothing to society. And from what Roger says, probably not to his marriage either.
Very good.